much for attending the second half, which will be focused more on political crises, political flashpoints is what we've called them, and how different scenarios within DSA have affected our own organizing, both internally as well as external factors. We're going to be going relatively chronologically. If you want to check out folks' bios, I believe they're on the website, on the DSA Day website. So I'll skip that just for time's sake. We'll do quick introductions of everyone. I'm Michaela, Brangan, she, her. I was formerly in River Valley DSA in Western Mass, and I've recently moved to North New Jersey DSA. But I'll be talking about my experience being a chair during COVID. I'm also going to be the moderator, so it is a little two hats. But we're going to be doing kind of panelist intros, as well as the campaigns or the organizing that they did, what the crisis was, and kind of a little bit more political theories of change. And we'll be having both kind of down the line chronological introductions and what we did, as well as a cross-panelist discussion, and then we'll break into breakout groups to have discussions about what we sort of think about the panel and what we think about the future. So without further ado, I'm going to just go ahead and name everyone and the direction we're going, and then everybody's going to have 5 minutes each, and then we'll go into the questions. So Sophia Nova from Chicago, Maikiko James from LA, we're going in this order, so Elena Gormley also from Chicago, and then Cara Tobe from Louisville DSA. So take it off, Sophia.
Awesome. Hi folks, my name is Sophia, or Soph, I use they, she pronouns, and yeah, based in Chicago. I was on the NPC with Maikiko from 2019 to 2021, and what I really want to talk about is how we built leaders, the standing army or the cadre in DSA, which was built through intervening in the extended crises that happened, kicking off with COVID in 2020, all the way through and after the election of Joe Biden and inauguration of Joe Biden, and how intervening in those external crises really helped build the organization while trying to mitigate and not exacerbate internal ones. So when COVID started and really hit the US in March of 2020, we knew we were in the middle of the DSA for Bernie campaign, and we knew that everything was about to change. And in the course of about a week, we moved from having an NPC steering committee meeting where we decided to put a plan in motion. 2 days later, we had about 50 chapter leaders on a call. 4 days after that, we had a mass call of about 1,600 people, and we basically dumped about 800 people into a Slack to try and start moving as rapidly as possible on projects that were in motion. These included the Emergency Worker Organizing Committee, which was started by DSA members, UE cadre, and folks in the Labor for Bernie formation, as well as the Housing Justice Commission. And then on the NPC, we were having daily stand-up meetings with almost everybody on staff, almost everybody in the NPC, and working as fast as possible to develop comms, emergency responses, and other pieces. Through that, we then were able to get our chapters in motion. Maikiko will talk a little bit about how we kept that momentum moving through the George Floyd rebellions and a lot of the BLM work that was happening over the summer. And we kept momentum moving through that, and we were able to really solidify a very strong network of chapter level leaders and work on identifying people that could then get in motion to be chapter captains for the 100K recruitment drive, as well as the November 2020 strategy. So the recruitment drive, basically what we wanted to be doing was we were building the Growth and Development Committee because we had this mandate from the convention to get to 100,000 members. And so we wanted to be able to hinge around a federal election because we knew that that is a time when we politicize millions of people and use that to intervene, again, in ongoing external crisis, while also bringing in as many people as possible into DSA. And in the course of about 7 weeks that fall, we brought in double the size of the 2014 organization in 6 weeks. So we did not make it to 100,000, but I would argue that it was a huge success. And in part, that's because we also were formulating a 5-year Green New Deal strategy in one of the other primary campaign apparatuses of DSA nationally. And from there, we were then able to take those chapter leaders. The coup did not happen. We were still able to mobilize people and make sure they stayed in motion. And then from there, we were able to take that momentum and seamlessly integrate it into a federal legislative pressure campaign that was able to introduce our labor climate theory of change that we had developed as a 5-year strategy through the PROACT campaign. So through that campaign, we inoculated hundreds of DSA members, rank and file union members in the coalition that we were building, and really come out like with a bang after Joe Biden was inaugurated and say we need to have like a fundamental different way of operating. And so that infrastructure then, multiple years later, 3 years later, was literally copy-pasted for the No Money for Massacres campaign right after October 7th, which again was a federal legislative pressure campaign that was able to call hundreds of thousands of people and really flip a lot of folks to get on board with DSA-elected Cori Bush's ceasefire resolution, and that showed how we had built the infrastructure, we had built the cadre, and we had built the ability to intervene in these external crises. So our task right now is precisely that, no matter what happens in November and beyond, is mass absorption and recruitment, and to really be as disciplined and focused as possible.
Thanks, Maikiko.
Thank you, Sophia. Wow, that recap. We did a lot. And it was a really interesting and dynamic time, being on the NPC during COVID, we went 2 in-person NPC meetings, and then the rest of our term was, again, virtual, and it was a pivot that, obviously for organizers was a challenge, but I think I remember the weight of that work, but also feeling really, really proud of everyone on the NPC and our staff in particular, really making that pivot possible. The infrastructure had to come together so quickly. We had to not lose momentum, right? We were, again, in the midst of the Bernie campaign, and we really needed a space for people to be, even if it was on your laptop at home, and really trying to figure out how to harness the energy that was ongoing. And then, of course, the uprising occurring, bringing us new opportunity to be physically in streets together, 26 million people in the streets of this country, demanding something that obviously has needed to happen in the entire history of the US, and realizing that these 26 million people didn't have political homes for the most part. So many new organizations, including DSA, really, I thought, made our best attempts to rise to the occasion, and for DSA's part, I felt really strongly about the work we did in coalition with organizations. In particular, we created a Defund the Police training program, which we did in coalition with Sunrise Movement, Song, and Dream Defenders, and created a whole new opportunity to bring, cross-community, cross-opportunity, actual training grounds for people to become better organizers, specifically around abolition and defunding the police campaigns around the country. And it really became a flashpoint for us, in addition to the burning campaigns and the AOC campaigns. The uprising really was a moment in which DSA grew as well, and I think a lot of people forget that. But because we had the established container for people to come to a protest and then sign up for something and then have a meeting to go to, that was really critical in our growth, and also critical in the representation of the organization, right? DSA was organizing for abolition. DSA was organizing for Black liberation. And I don't know that we've always carried that reputation. I don't know that we've managed to maintain it. At least I know, speaking personally, I've not maintained as much effort in that space in DSA as I would have liked. But I think it remains critically important, especially in this time, especially as we go into campaigns like Uncommitted and work to liberate Palestine. We have to continue to remember who DSA is and who we can be, right? And provide people the opportunity to say, oh, I don't know what to do after I'm going to this action, right? I don't know what to do after seeing someone on TV and being fired up. DSA really has to remain an organizing home for people. And I think that is, something so core to me in this organization. It's built me as an organizer. And in addition to that, the GDC, the Growth and Development Committee that Sophia touched on, that committee, I think, and Colleen chairs it today, it's such a fundamental part of who we are as DSA. We are here to cultivate, grow, and foster organizers, and to be people who can continue to motivate the movement. And so I, just wanting to praise is Michael here on staff. We did something like 260 mass calls over that 2-year term. 2 of them had over 1,200 attendees each, and most of them had people in the hundreds. And I was just looking at the list just now. Our organizer school call, the first one that came out of the GDC, had 900 people on it. And I'm like, we could do that again. DSA could do that again. And actually now is the moment to do that. I think always during presidential elections and national elections, it's a real time to be having our folks come together and say, I want to learn how to do this. I want to learn how to keep motivating the movement, and DSA really has the goods to get us where we're going.
Thanks, Maikiko. So I'm going to be speaking in a very similar timeline, actually, but from the perspective of a chapter chair during COVID, having just become a chapter chair, and having to pivot immediately from a very robust Bernie operation. We were actually the only chapter in our region holding down any Bernie canvassing in the area, and we were having huge debate night, parties, and it was extremely joyous, and then we were all of a sudden just shut down. For the context, for those of you who don't know, Western Mass is the western part of Massachusetts, otherwise known as the bestern part of Massachusetts, and River Valley DSA covers 3 counties just east of Berkshires, and it's a medium-ish sized chapter, extremely labor dense, especially with teachers, but it's one of many left organizations in the River Valley, or otherwise known as the Pioneer Valley. So like I said, we were leading Bernie, we were rocking these parties, and then it was a big dropout, and then all of a sudden, with no experience, put entirely online. And most key to that sort of political goal was to make sure we were responding to the local terrain and know what was most needed with the panic around COVID, playing to our chapter's strengths, which was labor, but we were somewhat disorganized. We had a lot of union members, but we didn't really have as much organizing within the chapter as we would, as you'll find out, will end up happening. And we also needed to keep everyone together and stay out of despair. So one of the things we did right away, just to make sure that everybody wasn't suffering, was we jumped straight in with an undocu fundraiser for workers who couldn't get unemployment or state aid because of their immigration status. We surpassed our goal of $8,000 by selling tickets to an online variety show, which none of us had any idea how to do, where we had bands and comedy and poetry readings. So that really helped to kind of give something for someone to attend, for it to be easy for people to do if they had the funds, or they could just show up. And then as COVID went on, we continued to focus heavy on labor solidarity, especially for teachers and nurses. So the National Demand Safe Schools campaign was actually a mainstay because of how many teachers we had. And then we were also able to pivot the next year into solidarity for the St. Vincent's Nurses Strike campaign, which was happening just to our east in Worcester. And I just, because we're a little short on time, I want to kind of cut this short, but I just want to emphasize that in this time, we were also able to co-sponsor, I think we're the first DSA chapter to ever co-sponsor anything with Labor Notes, to put on the first ever online Troublemakers School with the Western Mass Area Labor Federation. And we were able to get discounts for our members to attend, and then half of our members came, even people who were just interested in getting into unions but weren't in unions yet. And what this all did was it was able to get us more militant members of our chapter who were in unions but weren't involved, so they were getting more involved in their unions as socialists. People were joining unions, people who were not in unions were joining into labor work. And it ended up really having a galvanizing effect in our chapter to get what was a kind of labor working group that wasn't meeting very much to something that ended up becoming a standing committee and a mainstay of our chapter's work, a core element of our chapter's work, which has translated now into Palestine solidarity work, for which labor is a core element in the Valley, working both with the Western Mass Area Labor Federation, or the ALF, the MTA, Massachusetts Teachers Association, Pioneer Valley Workers Center, as well as other orgs in the area to hold down Palestine work. So in sum, labor as a core of your chapter ends up having these incredibly galvanizing effects, but it's, I think, to echo what Sarah said, it's really through, Sarah from our first panel, it's really through our actions that we bring people into the work. Whenever we're showing up for workers and the working class, and showing up for, sort of like what are really the core and relevant issues on the ground at the time. So, bringing it over to Elena. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you everyone. My name is Elena. I am one of the Chicago chapter co-chairs alongside Sean Duffy in the audience. I'm going to be speaking on some of the challenge, mostly about like some of the local political environment of the Chicago chapter during the Biden administration, looking at Biden administration during Lori Lightfoot's first and thank God only term as mayor, and then the Biden administration under Mayor Brandon Johnson. Because essentially, and the other reason why I specifically told Ashik I could only talk about kind of 21 and onward is I joined DSA in late 2021. So a lot of this is also bringing about my perspectives as a new member that was trying to get involved at this time. I will say we did a lot of really successful local organizing throughout the Trump administration in 2019, elected a whole bunch of socialists to city council, a lot of mass mobilization to support the CTU teacher strike. And a lot of this activity was successful because there was a big sort of rally around the flag flashpoint locally. All of the different other and sort of left or progressive NGOs and collectives and IPOs and all those groups really were in unison around opposing Trump and opposing bad things Lori Lightfoot was doing. But once the national political landscape changed, a lot of those groups, which have their own interests and can be very siloed, can be very territorial about who they organize and where they organize, some of those differences started to become more apparent. And that also became even more apparent around Brandon Johnson's campaign and his current first term. And what that means that right now we're essentially organizing around people responding to two Brandons, Joe Biden and Brandon Johnson, who both are not particularly popular. And kind of like one sort of end result is that in March, we were one of the groups campaigning for Bring Chicago Home, which would have taxed high-end properties in order to create dedicated revenue for homeless services, and that failed at the ballot box. And the two big reasons was turnout was low because the presidential elections were uncompetitive, and it was kind of the first electoral referendum on how Brandon Johnson was doing as mayor, and a lot of people were really, really dissatisfied. And that was a really tough loss for us, despite how successful we were in the precincts we canvassed. But it kind of was showing us kind of like where the sort of the health of the progressive left and our position in it. And we kind of got to that point because I think we did do support around the PRO Act and Green New Deal, but I think kind of there was like a lot of capacity, a lot of new members doing a lot of work during the Trump administration, and we saw that sort of same, started to see a drop off in member activity. This happened with left orgs across the country, and we also had a very kind of difficult time kind of reorienting back to sort of regular chapter business outside of a crisis pattern of mass protest, Zoom meeting, mass protest, Zoom meeting, mass protest, Zoom meeting, because we didn't really have anything else. There weren't really other places where you can just make political decisions together that didn't feel like a crisis point. And there was, and basically at the time that I joined and was trying to get involved, there was essentially a really big Gordon Ramsay style diner menu of things you could do. And the thing is that during the Trump administration, there was a lot of local capacity to support all of these different things: electoral work, mutual aid, socialist feminist organizing. working to end the detention of undocumented youth in nonprofit shelters, our defund campaign, Medicare for All, lifting the ban on rent control. And we got to a point where we didn't have capacity, we didn't really have structures in place to have some honest conversations about what we needed to prioritize. And what that meant is that by the time that my term started, there was just a lot of burnout, there was a lot of demotivation, even though there had been some recent successes. So what I've been doing in my 2 terms alongside Sean and alongside Sveta, our previous co-chair, is before we could do any of this stuff that we had been doing around responding to the Gaza genocide, supporting the amazing local Strike Ready campaign Sarah mentioned, we had to get back to having good meetings that were productive and people enjoyed going to. We had to get back to, if there's a big email back and forth among our leadership, we need to have a meeting instead of an email chain. We got rid of our chapter Slack. We really tried to emphasize the basics of here's how to get involved with a very specific things people can plug into so that we could organize and face the political environment we're currently in.
Amazing. Go ahead, Cara.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Cara Tobe. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm also currently on the NPC. And I'm going to talk a little bit about DSA's response to the overturn of Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision. At that point in time, that was during Biden's campaign, or his I guess, this current administration. And if you all remember, the leak came on a Monday night. People had heard rumblings that there was something that's going to happen. We weren't sure. But when the leak happened, it was actually during a Green New Deal Campaign Commission steering committee meeting. And we were wrapping up, and another comrade had said, hey, by the way, everybody, did you see what just came out? Did you see this leak? And at that point in time, our entire steering committee kind of just like stopped and just like kind of collectively had this moment of, holy shit, what is happening? What can we do? And so we had our emotions. We were able to talk through it. As a woman in a red state who I've had an abortion, like this is really like deeply impacts me in my life. It was a visceral reaction. But instead of just thinking about it and stewing about it and being angry about it, we decided to say, hold on, this is more important right now than any other thing that is happening. And so we stopped, and myself, my fellow co-chairs at the time, Abiant and Mark, and the rest of the GNDCC, we pivoted completely for about a week. We tapped into the national resources that existed from the PROACT campaign, which, by the way, is actually how I even got involved in national organizing to begin with, is because of the PROACT campaign. We tapped into those resources. We tapped into the resources that were built during the uprisings of 2020. We tapped into resources that the NLC had built over the many years. We reached out directly to the NLC. We reached out to the NEC. We got in touch with the NTC. We worked with the NTC. We purchased protectabortion.org like the next day. Surprisingly, nobody actually purchased that domain until we did. And so we did. And within 48 hours, we had a designer develop an entire branding strategy. We put together an entire national resource drive, which included graphics, included signs that chapters could print out and bring it to their own actions, their own campaigns that they decide to run. We developed alongside the NLC union resolutions to bring forward to say that this isn't right, and to protect reproductive care and work within their unions to work towards this. Between that week worth of just stop everything, mobilize, let's get whatever we can, all of a sudden we had a website that had a really cool map. I believe Jen M on the previous NPC developed it, where it highlighted every single chapter that was doing an abortion action, whether that was a rally, whether that was a campaign ask, whether that was a teach-in, and it highlighted that. So if people went to protectabortion.org, it was look at DSA members that are fighting on the streets, in their chapters and in political spaces, and in their families and unions, to be able to protect reproductive care. Locally, I think every chapter took it in different strides, because again, this was a leak, and you can, when a leak happens, you have to balance out, okay, is this actually real? Is this actually happening? Or is this just somebody who decided to cause a stir? But my gut reaction was no, this is real. This is very, very real. And we as an organization at the chapter level, at the national level, need to be prepared for when the inevitable decision does come down. And so, I'm not gonna lie, there were definitely some tensions. DSA, we are a big tent. We all have many feelings about a lot of things, and we don't always agree with how we need to move forward. And so this definitely came up where there was some disagreements on what is the best effort, what is the best way for us to move forward. In my chapter, what do we start mobilizing now, or do we wait until the decision is made or there's a ballot decision or ballot question? Louisville DSA, we spearheaded the Vote No on 2 campaign, and that was the structure for that was built over months of debate and deliberation and bringing new people into the chapter who had never been in DSA before. Sorry, I'm rambling.
Okay.
But
we're gonna go to questions. Thanks so much to everyone for sharing those initial thoughts, and a lot actually, what the questions were, we decided to ask. People kind of touched on some of those things in there, and so we're just gonna kind of try to dig a little bit deeper. I think probably a good question to start off with, just nuts and bolts, is if you had some kind of magical tool on hand, like something that either didn't exist, or did you think, I need a magical tool, and then we're able to create one? Maybe talk a little bit about that. And when we're talking about tools here, we're not just necessarily talking about org tools or something, but maybe something a little bit more DIY, not necessarily an application. So maybe just to think about that question, and whoever wants to go first, I see a hand, so maybe we can just kind of go in that order, and if folks want to also just maybe respond to each other a little bit, that would be really cool. Elena, and for this part, maybe just try to go for 2 to 3 minutes max. Thanks.
Yes, I will say something that was coming up even prior to my term, my time on the executive committee, something that previous co-chairs were mentioning is just massive administrative burden. There's a bunch of administrative tasks that come with being in leadership, particularly being a co-chair. There was, particularly for a large chapter, and co-chairs were really spending a lot of time dealing with Google and Action Network and Airtable and booking meetings and these kinds of things. And so we, several members brought forth a proposal to hire a part-time staffer. And we hired a part-time staffer. That was, during my first term, worked with my fellow co-chair, and we put together a hiring committee, and we hired a cadre member on a contract to do about 25 hours a week of administrative work. Help reserve the spaces for meetings, help reserve the restaurant for the after meeting social, do all of the sort of list uploading and tagging on Action Network, organize these documents in these Google Drives that we haven't gotten around to. It freed up a lot of time that myself and Sean, we can now spend doing the political work we were elected to do. And also, it hasn't eliminated, but it helped end the culture of treating the co-chairs as the customer service manager of socialism, which is not healthy. It's not a good feeling to be treated like that as a person. It doesn't create a good organizing environment for the entire chapter when other people are seeing leadership get treated that way. Again, and it's helped immensely with our capacity. Our membership unanimously voted to renew our staffers contract.
Great, Sophia, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of build on that question of staff capacity and like what it's useful for in the process of building the Green New Deal strategy, and then also thinking about the use of tools and how it's related to political leadership and like staying focused during crisis moments. You know, when I ran for the NPC, I ran on one platform and one platform only, which was we're going to turn the Green New Deal principles into a resolution and take that and turn it into a strategy. And I promised on the NPC to execute that strategy. And that was something that I stayed focused on. It was a personal goal for me. Maikiko can attest to how many votes I whipped and like conversations that I had, and where there was also like factional disagreement too, where I was like, I'm in like cadre process with people while I'm unloading frozen bread at night in my part-time job, spending 2 hours every single week for 10 weeks to build a 5-year strategy using the Midwest Academy strategy process. And from there, we're going to actually have a plan and be able to move on that plan. And that was what kept me grounded during that process, and then what kept the eco-socialists grounded as the political terrain shifted around us. And it also is what allowed us to be able to go to staff and say, look, we have hundreds of volunteers that are in motion right now. We had like 80 or 90 chapters all throwing down on what the demands should be and how this democratic decision-making process should work for a long-term strategy. And now we need the staff capacity to do X, Y, and Z very specific things. And that's how we were able to take the capacity to have an all-in campaign that like, we can debate whether or not it was effective or what was useful or whatever, but the fact is that we were able to all get information around it and make magic happen, and then do it again 3 years later with the No Money for Massacres campaign.
I had the privilege of working on and building the National Training Library with Glenn and Amy Zachmeyer and Michael, and again, so many people who've been instrumental in both developing myself as an organizer, but also trying to really establish what is the DSA roadmap for learning how to do this work. It's so mutable and changing every day. We are in a very volatile time. We remain in unprecedented times every day. How do we train our people to really respond to the moment? And the training library for me, I think not only as like a physical thing, right, with a syllabus and order in which you learn how to do organizing, was also a representative of creating the comprehensive culture of DSA as an organizing instructor, and thinking about, what are we building here, right? We're not just here to like get our ideas across. I really appreciated in the last panel, like we can't just beat people over the head with our ideas. It's not gonna work. You have to prepare your people to knock doors, to talk to people, to build relationships. And I think that was really core too, especially in the virtuality of it all and organizing through little Zoom boxes. What is the meat of the conversations that we're gonna be having, and what's the order to it? And then also training the trainers, right? We had dozens and dozens of people learn how to give these trainings. I remember when I joined in 2017, we had regional trainings and they were in person, and it was so lovely to just go to little conference rooms and community centers and have these DSA trainings. And when that stopped, in the pandemic, we really had to pivot and say, how do we, again, galvanize our people to want to learn? And that was something people were also really hungry for because of these massive events and things that were happening in our lives. How do we really gird ourselves to be the folks that are holding the container to let people come into DSA? And the training library and the trainings that happened subsequently to building that library, and while we were building that library, really to me, again, manifests who we are as an organization.
Cara.
Yeah, I kind of touched on it a little bit when I was doing my introduction, but what was really, really helpful is to be able to pull all these different resources and like to pull existing things and not having to recreate the wheel. Because it's really important that we write down like best practices. It's really important that we write down, how do you hold a seminar? How do you hold a webinar? How do you draft a union like resolution for your local? And to have like a version of that people can pick up and run with is so important. And also to have like collective resources, and I'm going to talk with a little bit of a comms brain here, but especially when you're thinking from a national campaign or a national thing, something that impacts a broad set of people, it's really good to have cohesive branding and cohesive visual identity, because it means that it's not just about one specific thing that's happening in one part of the country. It shows the size of the movement. It shows the size to say, wait, there are hundreds of thousands of people that are in LA, that are in Louisville, Kentucky, that are in Boston, that are in Florida, that are in Texas, wherever, and they're all holding the exact same sign that says protectabortion.org. And they're all handing out pamphlets that are easily printable, like ones that you can just print on your home printer, that have a QR code that take you directly to this place, that shows our theory of change, that shows like how an individual can get involved, can sign up like to protect abortion themselves. And then those are lists, those are names that we can gather. And honestly, there was no way that we would have been able to pull all of that information together so quickly if they didn't already exist and they weren't already in, you know, the Google Drives of various national committees and staff members and individual organizers. But so it's important, I guess, like the tool like to develop is like something very material, which is that library. It is that thing that you can go to and say, oh yeah, we have this already. We don't have to recreate the wheel. We don't have to have another 5-hour Zoom call about how to host a direct action. We know this. We can pull this from here. We can talk to our comrades about it. We can learn from each other.
I'm not going to add anything to that except that I agree that having all those things pulled together. One thing that I wish, the one thing that I did actually had because I had been in the organization for a couple of years already were contacts who I knew I could reach out to. But for people, especially at times of crisis when things are kind of uncertain and you don't know, like people are kind of here and there, you know, it's kind of, I think that this actually speaks to like one of these like tensions in a multi-tendency organization, because we also have different ideas about methods and tactics, and not everyone's gonna go to the library, right? Like, so it's like, how do we, I mean, I wish we had like some kind of, almost like a Leatherman universal tool to like speak to every single person's kind of bent, you know, whenever we're talking about how to like get people in touch with things. But something that was really helpful for me as a, at that point, it was like, I was a new chapter chair in 2020, was to be able to rely on, you know, people who knew how to run a call already before some of these things even existed on the national organization, and how to preserve, I guess this kind of just speaks to like how to preserve our institutional memory in ways that people can find easily accessible is something that DSA has struggled with over the years, you know, and like how to like sort of keep things, which I can just put in a plug for DSA archiving workshop whenever we get those off the ground again, hopefully after Socialism conference, to sort of pass along those skills so that people can also keep those with both the free tools that we all have access to, Google Docs, Google Suite, all of that stuff, as well as some of the things that we can pull down from national with the help of, you know, the NTC, for example. So actually this is a good segue into another sort of question about hurdles, barriers, obstacles. Did you face any organizing hurdles internally? So when we're talking about that, that's a delicate way of saying, how do we handle differences? How do we handle disagreements? Because during these times of crisis, there's also, you know, everyone could be pulled in a lot of directions, right? During COVID, I know it was like we had the, you know, Bernie fall out at the bottom, COVID come to the top, and then we had the George Floyd protests. Plus we're during an election year, so it was like everything firing at once and a lot of opinion. So if anyone wants to speak to how they, you know, we have a couple NPC members here as well as chapter leaders. So if anybody wanted to talk about anything you found to be difficult personally, or anything that you found to be difficult organizationally that you were hopefully able to figure out a way to mitigate. Yeah, go ahead, Maikiko.
I want to start with this because I want to acknowledge a deeply tense time that we find ourselves in the world globally, and then of course in the left. And Sophia and I found ourselves on a number of different sides of arguments throughout our term, and I'm thinking about where we are right now today, and I'm so grateful for their mentorship and comradeship, and like realizing like this is the fight, right? Eyes on the prize. If we are DSA, the mass socialist organization we want to be, we really have to remember what we're fighting for. And I think, of course, there are urgent fights in the moment that we will disagree on, but ultimately, like, I look back 7-8 years later, and I'm like, I'm still here. And I really still believe in this organization, and I really still believe in the project of socialism, and I think it's critical for our world if we want to survive it, literally. And I want to provide, like 8 years in, you're going to have a lot of fights. It's going to feel really hard and tense and scary and frustrating, and it's much easier to, punch to our left and right in the organization as opposed to like the greater, scarier forces that are out there in the world because you're talking to these folks. But I really just want to emphasize, this was also the community that held me during this time, right? DSA was my home, and it was my family, is my family. There's still, the relationships in this organization have changed who I am. And so, as tempting as it can be to, get on fights on Twitter, we'll call it X.
Quit Twitter.
Quit Twitter.
Moderator.
Do it.
Privilege.
Quit Twitter.
Thinking about, also, and actually politically we came really in much closer alignment over the 2 years working together, and I found much more alignments with people who I thought I had factual differences with over the next 6 years, because I still believe in this. However many ideas are floating, overall, the DSA bucket is one that I think fully deserves all of our hearts, even if we don't agree with everything that's happening in it. So that for me was the long view, and also the genuine, it's gonna sound cheesy, but relationship and loving care we have for each other, I think sets us apart from so many other places in the world.
Cara?
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because it is really hard to remember. I'm sure many of us in here can probably currently feel ways about different ideas and decisions that are made. And I think something that I want to kind of tie back to specifically the Protect Abortion work is, at that moment in time when the leak happened, I was on our chapter steering committee, and I felt this urgent need to do something. I had to do something. I couldn't just stay still. I couldn't just watch it happen. I had to move. I had to act. Otherwise, I would have gone crazy. I would have completely broken down. And luckily DSA provides that space to be able to let that energy out in a way that is productive. Or sometimes it doesn't feel productive. Sometimes it feels like you're just running in circles, but the big key is to keep the eye on the prize. And on my local steering committee, when the leak happened, I was like, we need to move now. This is what we gotta do. Can we talk about it? Can we do this? Let's go. And there was some hesitation, to be frank. There was some hesitation about that. And it was like, what does this mean for our local? What does this mean? There's nothing for us to debate about at this point. There's nothing for us to do. But I disagree with that stance. So I didn't take that time personally to then just wild out on my comrades. No, absolutely not. That's not effective. That's not productive. Yeah, I was annoyed, and yeah, I went to my friends on the side being like, oh my God, I'm so frustrated. But then I turned around and was like, what's the actual problem at hand? The actual problem at hand is that our reproductive rights, my rights are being stripped. That is the problem. That's what I need to focus on. That's what we need to focus on. So you shift in that direction. You say, you know what, that's fine. You can have different opinions, but I'm gonna keep doing what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna bring my comrades with me, and I'm gonna work towards making it happen. And come along whenever you decide to come along, whenever it's right. Let's work together. We might not agree at that point in time, but it doesn't mean we can't not agree again. And it doesn't mean we can't work together in the future. And it doesn't mean we can't win this damn world that we deserve. So that's kind of how I internalized it. It was especially when you feel this need to move, don't let it hold you back. Move. You should move. Moving is better than stagnating. There's a quote that I read in a book in high school. I don't remember the name of it, but it stuck with me for so long, which is things that don't change are dead things. If they're not growing in some way, or even decomposing in some way, or moving, those things are dead. And we should never allow ourselves as socialists in 2024, in the world that we are in, to stay to stay in that stagnant space. We have to always be moving. We have to always be changing. That's how we get better. That's how we win.
Elena?
I have absolutely used the full skill set of being a former Sunday school teacher to help. Because again, if you can work with fifth graders to teach them how to have arguments for the sake of heaven as they're studying Torah, you can absolutely create and facilitate meetings where you can have comradely disagreement. And so. If anyone comes to one of our quarterly general chapter meetings, Chicago members, better see you, September 22nd. I always take this section where we devote a fair amount of time in the introduction to highlight, we use feminist process as a standard for all of our meetings, and we go through it. And I always highlight, we do voting cards. So like any votes, candidates endorsements, issue campaign endorsements, any decisions, you're gonna see how everyone in the room is voting, and I highlight that. You are going to see how everyone in the room is voting. If you see a friend or a comrade make a vote that's very different, then we're gonna have a social afterwards, we can talk about that. You can get on Stack during debate. But I really am a big do not tweet partisan, and I actually do highlight do not tweet through your feelings during this meeting. If you have disagreements, you need to bring them to the debate that is governed by feminist process and our code of conduct. Twitter is not governed by the DSA code of conduct or feminist process. And also, we got rid of our Slack. It was a helpful space kind of during the pandemic, but it got to the point where it was disorganizing the chapter, and it was creating conflict rather than creating a space where people could work out differences in a comradely way. So we brought a proposal to dismantle it, and we pushed the big red button and we got rid of it. We now have a WhatsApp group, and it's not a one-to-one change, because now to be part of the CDSA WhatsApp community, you need to be a member in good standing, and you have to have attended at least one chapter event in the last 6 months. So it's not like okay, welcome, you're a member now, join the WhatsApp. You come to a meeting, and then you can get added to it. So it means that your first experience is going to be in a chaired, facilitated meeting, being in space with other people talking about politics before we add you to the WhatsApp community. I will say I've also, there's been times where other things were happening where we were very heavy-handed with, great, we're gonna shut down this chat while this big protest is happening, or when the assassination attempt against Trump happened, where we did not know what was going on. All I did was basically post that sort of the on the media guidelines about what to understand during breaking news crisis, and then we just shut it down, being too much is happening, we don't know what's going on, we are going to close this down until we get a better understanding of this giant crisis that just happened. So I think being mindful of those different tools and having space where maybe we're not all posting all the time is one way that in the immediate moment of stuff that's developing, having that space where people can't really just text away their feelings can also be a helpful tool for that.
And then I'll go after you, and then we'll do a lightning round, and then
Perfect. Thank you, and thank you for moderating and also weighing in too. Yeah, I want to say a couple of things on this question. When I joined DSA on J20 in 2017, I already had 7 years of organizing experience on the left and had seen organizations crystallize, fall apart, get consumed by factional conflict, and try and work through periods of mass absorption. And it took me months to get involved in DSA because I saw folks flooding into meetings, not knowing how to deal with some of those initial conflicts or knowing how, the structural questions of how to work through disagreement. And to me, I think that is one of the most important questions in this period that we are in right now, as we go through a wave of people who were politicized during both of the Bernie campaigns, through COVID, through all this other stuff, that are coming to the realization that they're going to have to be operating at this level of sacrifice and like work and emotional exhaustion for the rest of their lives, no matter what, because we are cadre that are building the left and we have all of the forces of capital arrayed against us. And so there are structural ways in which we need to identify how we can de-escalate factional conflict inside of DSA, because it is at a very serious, like nearly breaking point right now, and we need to be intentional about naming that. And I will say that like I'm not necessarily a totally innocent partisan in that either. Like I believe that political conflict is necessary and is important to be able to clarify those positions. And I will also like say that I have taken things personally at times that I should not have taken personally, and have used that to do things like tweet. That is not productive. And I think being in that like day-to-day of knowing how to do that and like be able to go back to people afterwards, to be able to suss out what's political conflict, what's personal, because that's the thing that's related to the structural part of it, is that there also are ways in which people interpersonally fuck each other up in this organization. I had to take a break from DSA for a year, get medicated, get in therapy, and like, you know, then change my name. And I just took my first shot of HRT on Tuesday, and like am now in this process of really doing that self-actualization work that I did not have space or time for while I was on the NPC. That wasn't the only reason, but that was a part of it. And I think being very explicit about that with each other, about self-actualization, about what else is going on in our lives, about what it takes for us to tap in and out as leaders, both formal leaders and organic leaders, is super, super, super important. And identifying those points of difference, figuring out how we can have productive political conflict, while also naming red lines, like not doxing your comrades, like not doing race science on your comrades, like all of these other things that we've seen happen in DSA that have driven people out of the organization. It's unacceptable, and we need to name it as such, while also figuring out how we can engage in more productive political conflict too.
Okay, so I was going to add a lot of what people sort of said was part of what I was going to say. I can say that my chapter from Western Mass, democracy within the chapter was always, even with flaws, you know, always a high priority, and not, you know, to the extent that nothing ever got done, but actually like making sure that even if you were walking away having lost, you feel like everything was fair. I think that is a huge part of it, because if we're organizing through crises or organizing through these uncertain times, it does not help to feel like there's some kind of, you know, the place that's your home is not a place for you because you're a loser or whatever. So that also means that the winners can't be sore winners either. And we're just doing decisions here, right? Like anybody can find themselves on either side of anything at any point if we're doing this right. I can also just say, and I think that I've heard this with a lot of what people are saying, is that that also takes forgiveness, right? It takes a lot of tolerance. It takes a lot of making sure that, you know, even when somebody's bugging the shit out of you, you know enough to be able to try to step away or try to extract yourself rather than lash out. That is really, really hard sometimes, especially because we care so much, right? Like, because we all care so goddamn much, we would not be in this room if not. So we have time, if we're going with our 5 minutes behind schedule, for a lightning round question, and it's a heavy one, so this is going to be extremely fun. We're going to start in reverse order. So Cara, you're going to go first, then Elena, Maikiko, or Elena, me, Maikiko, and then Sophia. So 30 to 45 seconds. What, in your opinion, is the current state of the left in the United States? 30 to 45 seconds, go.
Okay, I knew that this question was going to come, and I still don't have a good answer for it. But it's, I believe the state of the left is at a pivotal moment with a lot of possibility and a lot of opportunity. So a lot of upside. We just have to own it. I think that's my perspective.
I would say the state is second verse, same